Hi, hello to all the NEET aspirants. Today we are going to discuss about the topic respiration in plants. In this, of course, we will discuss about, from respiration in plants, we will discuss about both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration, right? Aerobic and anaerobic respiration. In this class, we are going to deal with the respiration and the respiratory cells of a plant and then glycolysis. After that, we are going to discuss about anaerobic respiration in the plants. So, if you look into the exact definition of respiration, respiration is said to be a catabolic process or exothermic process. It is also said to be an amphibolic process, oxidative process. This and all are the synonyms for the term respiration. What is actually respiration mean? Respiration is nothing but oxidation of macromolecules of food particles, like carbohydrates, proteins, fats into simpler substances and releasing out energy from them is called as respiration. What is respiration, ma? Oxidation or breakdown of complex organic molecules or macromolecules into simpler substances by releasing out energy. Energy is called as respiration. Catabolic process, it is called as catabolic process because it is involved in breakage of macromolecules like carbohydrates, sugars, proteins, fats into simpler molecules. That is why it is called as catabolic process. The breakdown of carbon-carbon bonds, complex carbon-carbon bonds will release out the energy and heat. It will release out the energy and heat. That is why it is called as exothermic process. And the respiratory intermediates which are produced in this process, respiratory intermediates will enter into biosynthetic pathways of other molecules like fats, proteins and lipids. Okay, that is why this is called as amphibolic pathway, and this is called as oxidative process because it will release out oxygen during this process. It is called as oxidative process because oxidation of macromolecule takes place and it will release oxygen during process. And this is also called as an enzymatic process. Because breakdown or oxidation of macromolecules will not just take place in a single step. It is controlled by many steps. It is many step controlled process. It is a stepwise process controlled and coordinated by many enzymes. That is why it is also called as an enzymatic process. So, yes, what we have discussed, respiration is also called as catabolic process, exothermic process because it releases out heat, amphibolic pathway or amphibolic process because the respiratory intermediates whichever are produced are joining the biosynthetic pathways of many other molecules like fats, lipids, proteins, and it is called as oxidative process, and then it is called as an enzymatic process, because the breakdown of macromolecules is not single step process, it is a multi-step process. This is all about respiration in detail. Next, if we look into few terms like respiratory substrates. What are respiratory substrates? Respiratory substrates. And what does the term mean? Cellular respiration. Cellular respiration. The molecules which are involved in the oxidation are called as respiratory substrates. Mostly the respiratory substrate is carbohydrate. Mostly the respiratory substrate is carbohydrates, but quite at times the respiratory substrates can also be proteins, fats and amino acids or fatty acids, some other molecules. Okay. Most of the times respiratory substrate is carbohydrates, but many at times, quite a few times, proteins and fats can also act as respiratory substrates. What is cellular respiration? What is cellular respiration? Oxidation of macromolecules inside a cell, oxidation of macromolecules inside a cell, and producing or releasing out the energy, that is cellular energy, which is called as ATP, Oxidation of macromolecules and release of cellular energy, that is ATP, which is utilized for the many metabolic activities inside the cell, is called as cellular respiration. These are the basic terms that we have to know. And firstly, I would like to ask you a question regarding difference between respiration and breathing. Tell me the difference between respiration and breathing. And one more question, what is breathing, or do plants breathe? Second question is, do plants breathe? Yes. Exchange of gases or gaseous exchange between organism and its surroundings is called as breathing. Oxidation of macromolecules or organic molecules inside the living organism, producing or releasing out the energy, is called as respiration. And as we human beings or animals have a complex respiratory system, does plants also do have a respiratory system or any organs that it can breathe? Yes, it doesn't have a complex respiratory system, but it can breathe through stomata and lenticels. Plants do breathe through stomata and lenticels. Okay, lenticels which are present on the stem, stomata which are present over the leaf will conduct gaseous exchange in the plants. Why complex respiratory organs or respiratory system is absent in plants? Reasons behind that are, the very first reason is each plant organ will take care of its own respiratory needs or its own gaseous exchange. Each plant organ takes care about their own gaseous exchange or respiratory needs. Second point is, all the cells of the plant body are mostly built of parenchymatous cells. Plant body is mostly built of parenchymatous cells and they have intercellular spaces. Parenchymatous cells which have intercellular spaces. And most of the plant tissues are closely arranged to the surface area. Plant tissues are closely arranged to the surface area. And the oxygen whichever is released or liberated out as a byproduct in photosynthesis is also utilized by respiration. Okay? The oxygen which is liberated as a byproduct during photosynthesis is utilized by plant tissues for respiration. It is utilized by plant tissues for respiration. These are few of the reasons why plants doesn't have a complex respiratory system, and plants do breathe through stomata and lenticels. They do breathe through stomata and lenticels. This is a little introductory part of this chapter where we have to focus on, and then coming to the actual segment of the chapter, that is two types of respiration do exist. Respiration which is of two types in plants, that is aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Respiration is of two types, aerobic and anaerobic respiration. First is anaerobic and second type is aerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration or aerobic respiration it might be. In both the types of respiration, glycolysis is common. Glycolysis is common. Glycolysis, which is also called as EMP pathway. Glycolysis is also called as EMP pathway. It is named after the three scientists Emden, Meyerhoff and Parnas. This glycolysis, it will break down the glucose into one molecule of glucose into two molecules of pyruvic acid. It will break down one molecule of glucose into two molecules of pyruvic acid. This takes place in the cytoplasm of a cell. This takes place in the cytoplasm of a cell. So, after the formation of pyruvic acid can enter into three pathways. It has three options to enter pyruvic acid. If it is conducting anaerobic respiration or oxygen is absent in anoxygenic conditions, pyruvic acid will go, or it will opt either alcoholic fermentation or lactic acid fermentation, or if it is in the presence of oxygen, that is aerobic respiration, pyruvic acid from the cell cytoplasm, pyruvic acid will immediately carried to mitochondria. Pyruvic acid will be immediately carried to mitochondria. Inside mitochondria, three subsequent reactions will happen. One is link reaction, which is called as oxidative decarboxylation. Second is Krebs cycle or TCA cycle, and third is electron transport chain or electron transport system. At the end, the energy is released. So, a cellular energy is released. Here in the anaerobic respiration, the ultimate energy which is released is just 2 ATP, but the energy released after aerobic respiration is around 38 ATP, 36 to 38 ATP. So, yes, this is the energy difference between anaerobic and aerobic respiration. In today's class, we are going to discuss more detailedly, and we are also going to discuss about energetics of glycolysis and anaerobic respiratory pathways, that is alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. If we look into the just now what we have discussed, pyruvate. After glycolysis, pyruvate will have two options. One, in the absence of oxygen, it will conduct fermentation, be it alcoholic fermentation or lactic acid fermentation in the cytoplasm itself. And whenever oxygen is present in the mitochondrial matrix, it undergoes three subsequent reactions. One is link reaction, second is TCA cycle, and third is ETS, electron transport system. Yes, now if we look into the process of glycolysis, most important beta, many at times the questions are asked from this process, glycolysis. Okay, so glycolysis is also called as EMP pathway, which is named after the scientists Emden, Meyerhoff and Parnas. Here 10 biochemical reactions will happen here. How many reactions? 10 biochemical reactions. 10 biochemical reactions, wherein in this 10 subsequent reactions, first 5 steps is called as preparatory phase. First 5 steps is called as preparatory phase. First 5 steps is called as preparatory phase. Next 5 steps is called as payoff phase. First 5 steps is called as preparatory phase. Next 5 steps is called as payoff phase. Okay. The first 5 steps, if you look into beta, the first 5 steps if you look into, yeah, here first step, glucose to glucose 6 phosphate. Here the enzyme which mediates the first reaction, first glucose, when it enters the cytoplasm of the cell, immediately glucose is converted to glucose 6 phosphate, glucose 6 phosphate by the enzyme hexokinase. By the enzyme hexokinase, glucose is converted to glucose 6 phosphate by utilizing the energy ATP. By utilizing the energy ATP, glucose is converted to glucose 6 phosphate. Next, glucose 6 phosphate, which is 6 carbon, is converted to fructose 6 phosphate. This is isomerization reaction, and here the enzyme involved is phosphohexose isomerase, phosphohexose isomerase, or else you can directly write it as hexose isomerase, hexokinase, and here hexokinase, here it is phosphohexose isomerase. Next, from fructose 6 phosphate, phosphorylation happens and it gets converted to fructose 1,6 bisphosphate. This is the third step of glycolysis, which is very important. This is mediated by phosphofructokinase. Phosphofructokinase, which is the rate limiting step. This is the rate limiting step. This step will decide like how fast, what should be the frequency of glycolysis is decided by this step. Next, fructose 1,6 bisphosphate by the enzyme aldolase, it is cleaved to glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate, which is 3 carbon, and dihydroxyacetone phosphate, which is DHAP. Okay. This glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate, from this steps, this is called as payoff phase, where it will release out the energy. Once glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate has continued one cycle, next DHAP is again converted to glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate, and again the step continues, and again the 5 steps continues. So from here we have to calculate 2 molecules for each step, 2 molecules of energy for each step, because G3P is continuing this cycle twice. DHAP is again converting to G3P and continuing the next 5 steps of glycolysis. I hope you understand. Now here if you see beta, G3P is converted to 1,3-bisphosphoglyceric acid by the enzyme dehydrogenase, by the enzyme dehydrogenase, and the release of 2NADH plus H plus. We will count it as 2 because these 2 molecules will conduct 2 steps of cycles, right? That is why we are counting 2 NADH is released, not just one. 2 NADH is released from one molecule of glucose. Okay. Then 1,3-bisphosphoglyceric acid to 3-phosphoglyceric acid by the enzyme kinase. This is called as substrate level phosphorylation. This step, 7th step, is called as substrate level phosphorylation, because here phosphate group is added from the substrate. Phosphate group is added to the ATP from the substrate. Next, 3-phosphoglyceric acid to 2-phosphoglyceric acid by the enzyme phosphoglycerate mutase is the enzyme which catalyzes this reaction, and then 2-phosphoglyceric acid to phosphoenol pyruvate is modulated by the, is converted by the enzyme enolase, and last step is by pyruvate kinase or pyruvate kinase. These are the enzymes which are involved in the 10 steps of the glycolysis. First 5 steps is called as preparatory phase because it is utilizing the energy. The first step, hexokinase, and third step and 10th step, the cofactor which is included along with this enzyme is magnesium. Hexokinase along with magnesium. Then third step, phosphofructokinase along with magnesium. And here pyruvate kinase also has magnesium, which is a cofactor. Okay, magnesium is a cofactor of first, third and 10th steps. First, third and 10th steps are called as irreversible steps. First, third and 10th steps are irreversible. Most important beta, irreversible. Okay, first, third and 10th steps are irreversible. Yeah. Now, if you look into first step, here one molecule of ATP is utilized, and third step which is called as rate limiting step, here second molecule of ATP is utilized. If you look into the 6th step, 2 NADH are released out by the enzyme dehydrogenase from glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate to 1,3-bisphosphoglyceric acid. And in the 7th step, which is a substrate level phosphorylation, 2 molecules of ATP are released, and in the 10th step also 2 molecules of ATP are released. So yes, if you look into the payoff phase, in payoff phase, in payoff phase, in 6th step, 2 molecules of NADH are released, and in the 7th step and 10th step, this is in the 6th step. In the 7th step and 10th step, in the 7th and 10th step, 4 ATP are released. 4 ATP are released. So, if at all you will get a question, what is the energy released during substrate level phosphorylation? Substrate level phosphorylation, or you can say it as SLP. Okay, 4 ATP are released, that is in the 7th step and 10th step of glycolysis. From the 4 ATP that are released into the cytoplasm, 2 ATP are utilized above. So, we will say the net ATP of glycolysis is, 2 ATP. Okay, net ATP of glycolysis is 2 ATP, because from the 4 ATP which are released in the payoff phase at 7th and 10th step, which are released into the cytoplasm, of them 2 ATP are utilized by the preparatory phase of glycolysis itself. So, that is why the net ATP released of glycolysis is 2 ATP, and the total energy released in the glycolysis, total energy released in the glycolysis is 2 ATP plus 2 NADH. We all know that 1 NADH is equal to 3 ATP, approximately it is 3 ATP accurately through, so accurately through 2.5, but approximately it is 3 ATP. This is what we will calculate, right? So yes, 2 NADH, 1 NADH is equal to 3 ATP, so 2 NADH is 6 ATP. So yes, 2 ATP plus 6 is 8 ATP on total. Okay, this is 8 ATP on total. So total energy released by the process of glycolysis is 8 ATP. Okay, net ATP released by glycolysis is 2 ATP, total energy released is 8 ATP, and substrate level phosphorylation occurs in the steps 7th and 10th. And what is the substrate level of what is the energy released through substrate level phosphorylation means it is 4 ATP. Okay, what is the energy released through SLP? If that is the question, then you have to answer 4 ATP. What is the net ATP released in the glycolysis? It is 2 ATP. Total energy released during glycolysis is 8 ATP. Okay, this energetics part is very important beta, and all the enzymes you have to remember, whichever enzymes are catalyzing each step of reaction in glycolysis is important. Okay, this is what we have to remember with respect to glycolysis. And then if you look into, if after the formation of pyruvic acid, anaerobic respiration is taking place. Anaerobic respiration happens inside the cytoplasm itself. Anaerobic respiration occurs inside the cytoplasm only. But here in alcoholic fermentation, if you see, in alcoholic fermentation, first pyruvate is turned to acetaldehyde by the enzyme pyruvic acid decarboxylase. By the enzyme pyruvic acid decarboxylase, here each molecule of pyruvate is 3 carbon, each molecule of acetaldehyde is 2 carbon. Then acetaldehyde to ethanol by the enzyme alcoholic dehydrogenase is the enzyme, dehydrogenase. At the end, ethanol is formed at the end of alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation occurs mostly in the yeast and some bacteria. It occurs mostly in the yeast and some bacteria, wherein it will release out, it will regenerate out the NADH. If you see, it will regenerate out the NAD+. If the organism is conducting alcoholic fermentation, the NAD+ is released when the acetaldehyde is converted to ethanol. This NAD+ is taken by the process of glycolysis, 6th step of glycolysis. The NADH which it is releasing is taken by the process of alcoholic fermentation. So here the net ATP or the total energy released during the process of alcoholic fermentation is just 2 ATP. This 2 ATP is also the net ATP of glycolysis. NADH is not released because of fermentation. It is because NADH whichever is released in the process of glycolysis is utilized by the fermentation, and this will regenerate back the NAD+ that is utilized by the glycolysis process. Fine, clear? This is all about alcoholic fermentation, and we have to remember these enzymes. Next, if you look into lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation. Wherein pyruvate is converted to lactic acid by the enzyme lactic acid dehydrogenase. By the enzyme lactic acid dehydrogenase, pyruvate is converted to lactic acid. Here also in this process NAD+ is released back, and that is regenerating back the NAD+ which is utilized by glycolysis, and glycolysis whichever NADH it is releasing, that is utilized by lactic acid fermentation process. Mostly this lactic acid fermentation is operated in the human system whenever we are doing vigorous exercise or running, jogging. At that time the muscles, when they are deprived of oxygen, muscle cells or muscle tissues, when they are deprived of oxygen, to get the quick energy, immediate energy, lactic acid fermentation is operated in the muscle cells, wherein less amount of energy is released, that is just 2 ATP. that is just 2 ATP, and because of this lactic acid fermentation they will get the body pains, okay, usually cramps and all will get because of that lactic acid fermentation that is happening when we are doing vigorous exercise and all. This 2 ATP is also the net ATP of glycolysis. This will not produce, this lactic acid fermentation will not produce any energy. So yes, this is all about today's class. What we have discussed, respiration, its synonyms, introductory parts, why plants, what are the breathing cells in the plants and why respiratory system is absent in the plants. Most importantly, glycolysis process, net ATP of glycolysis, total ATP of glycolysis, and what is the energy released through SLP in the glycolysis, what is the rate limiting step and which steps are irreversible in glycolysis. Later on we have looked into the alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. Let us end the session with the diagram which is given in our NCERT. If you look here beta, the sixth step, NAD plus is converted to NADH plus H plus. Pyruvic acid if it is conducting alcoholic fermentation, pyruvic acid if it is conducting alcoholic fermentation. See, ethanol and carbon dioxide are released, ethanol and carbon dioxide are released, and this releases out NAD plus which is regenerating NAD plus for glycolysis. If it is conducting lactic acid fermentation, this is the energy which is released, okay, this is regenerating back the NAD plus which is utilized for glycolysis. Total ATP that is released through anaerobic respiration is just 2 ATP, keep that in your mind. In the next class, we are going to look into oxidative decarboxylation, Krebs cycle, electron transport system and amphibolic pathways, and we are also going to discuss about respiratory quotient. So, stay tuned. Thank you.